Recording.
Welcome to the sixth in our online conversations about wisdom in the current very challenging circumstances. What must we ask of our individual and collective wisdom, and how can we live, act and lead even more wisely? What does that look like? And our subject today is the notion of wise conversation, which has been an underlying theme in all our conversations to date. The quality of our inner conversation with ourselves, the quality of our conversation with others. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my friend and comrade, Dave Barrett. Are you there, Dave?
I am. Morning, Julian.
Morning,
Lovely
Dave.
to see you, as always.
Good to see you. And if I could just introduce you, Dave. So I've got the airwaves now, so you can't deny any of this. Well, you can, but... So Dave is a friend and comrade of mine and several other colleagues, is a deep-thinking student and purveyor of great conversation, who, after a career in conservation with the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, now works in the world of conversation, in conflict resolution, in mediation, in healing, both organisationally and in teams and individually. And I've really enjoyed getting to know you, Dave, the last year or so. And I wondered, as we just jump into our conversation, whether we might, because I know you and I hold this very dear, this notion of wise conversation. Why do we both feel, why do you feel it's so important right now? And for me, in this uncertain world, the quality of dialogue is so important. And in our world, which is, increasingly divided and polarized, conversation is a mode of connection. Where do you come at this, Dave, about its importance?
Yeah, that's a great question, Julian, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I can summarize it in one word, which is pressure. And, by experience, and I spend a lot of time with people who are under pressure because of the reason they're coming to see me or want to work with me is because they're in a difficult issue with a colleague or with colleagues, or they're in a situation with their manager where things are not going well. And the effects of pressure, I think, are quite profound on people. And I think often people don't recognize it. They feel things, but I don't think they recognize the significance of it necessarily always, and how it affects their relationships particularly. But just if we zoom out for a moment, there's a huge amount going on. There's COVID-19, there's climate crisis, and there's this sort of fight for just general resources, the current economic situation, what's on the horizon. And I think you talked about polarization, but that polarization is a symptom of what I feel is kind of narcissistic leadership at the moment. And that kind of narcissistic, selfish orientation of a lot of leaders across the world just adds to the pressure that people feel. And why is pressure such a problem? Well, I think we have a really brilliant organ in our heads, the brain, and it's just amazing. It's it's evolved over millennia to what it is now. And I think what's fascinated me more than anything is just really understanding just how it really works on different levels. And I think a real key thing for me is just how primitive we are in many ways. And I think that can be quite surprising for people, and particularly around how we've evolved to survive. And collaboration and creativity is a real hallmark of who we are as humans, and that's also necessary for survival. And I think working and operating in groups is a real essential skill that we have. But the kind of dark side of that for me is that you kind of get a tribalism with that. Yeah, and you get people who, who think about people who are different as potentially a threat, that kind of thing, because it's a challenge to your group. And I think people know these things happen, but they don't think about them particularly. And as we kind of zoom into, organizations, I think there are a few things that make a real difference for me. And I often think organizations are a microcosm of what's going on in the wider world. So, lots of organizations, I do a lot of work in the NHS, for example, and there's huge amounts of pressure. So if you've got pressure, then you've got leadership that doesn't support people to manage that pressure well. And then you've got difference. So, a lot of organizations now are very rich in all sorts of ways, and it's not just about ethnicity necessarily, it's, people in different teams, admin team versus doctors or nurses or whatever team. So as soon as you've got that difference, these kind of tribalisms start to come to the surface. Combine that with poor leadership, and you've got a bit of a perfect storm. And I think, for me, that's the kind of context we're operating in at the moment. I don't know whether you have any reviews on that.
I do, and I hear you totally. And your frame about perfect storm, because I know through these conversations, a number of us have been talking about possibility for significant change and optimism and all of that. And yet, certainly when I cue into my leadership development colleagues, there's a sense of relentlessness that's going on at the moment. Pressure, people very busy, feeling your word of pressure, and concerned about what that is doing for them. And so I'm hearing you, this triangle of pressure, difference, poor leadership, perhaps narcissistic leadership, absolutely see that at the political level. And conversation, I guess, its quality is such an important way of navigating through that. Is that how you position it? Perhaps, Dave, around that might invite you into some of the things you hold dear about what great conversation looked like, what we should ask ourselves in this environment.
Yeah, so I think there's just something to say about relationships in general. The way that, there's a lot of emphasis, Julian, on body language and the importance of body language. And it is, but actually conversation is equally, if not more important. That is the way we understand each other. So there are cues in our body language, but the primary way that we make sense of the world and we make sense of each other is through the way that we speak to each other and the way that we understand each other and make meaning of things, which is a really important thing that we're trying to achieve. But I think there's something about the quality of the relationships that we have and the quality of the conversations. And it's, there's lots and lots of research that a more loving, caring relationships that you have, the more of those that you have, the higher your well-being will be. And that's what it's about, really. So how do you create caring relationships and quality relationships? And I feel the only way you can do that is by the quality of the conversations that you have with people. And that's kind of where my brain is at on all of this. It's essential. And I think often pressure, particularly in workplaces, is a kind of general sense, but there's something about time as well. Having the time to converse and talk properly with people is also another issue. Because what I feel is when people are working with me, what we're doing is we're slowing time down. We're enabling them to have a conversation that they would never normally have. And the reason that they don't have it is because primarily they're afraid to have it. So courage is a really important aspect, but they haven't made the time to have it. And I think time is another factor that really is important to consider. Being patient with people, particularly if things are not going well, is absolutely essential.
And Dave, that we know, don't we, from our experience, that that's incredibly hard at the moment, given the Zoom world most of us have to inhabit, and that it's very difficult to catch people in the normal way in corridors and so forth, and to slow down and make that time, because one has to be really bothered to set things up. Yeah. So I'm really interested in how you would develop that theme about. You've talked about courage, about being patient. What for you are the ingredients of some of those things? as you think about, how you support great conversation as the core of loving, caring, quality relationships?
So, I mean, I think fundamentally it's about belonging. So when people belong to something, they feel valued, they feel listened to, they feel trusted, they feel appreciated. And those factors are really, really important. So it's how do you make people feel like that? To me is really, really important. So setting things up to enable that to happen is critical. So there are quite a few different things I think coming to mind here. The first one, which is a real challenging thing, and it's easy to say, which is listening. And you'll know yourself, both of us are involved in sort of listening work. And I thought I was a great listener until I started doing work with Samaritans. And then I realized how rubbish my listening skills really were.
Same with me, working with the listening police, similar thing.
Yeah. So, and I kind of, we hear terms like active listening, and I think that's all great. But I feel there's a particular type of listening that we really have to focus our attention on, and that's what I call listening to recover meaning. So in my experience, when people talk, they can, I just find this incredible. It's one of the most incredible things I see on a daily basis, particularly in mediation work, is two people can have such a different perspective on exactly the same thing. And that's all about the meaning they place on those events. And I think that's where we go wrong, that even if we're listening carefully to somebody, we can still come away with a different sense of meaning and understanding. And that's where the problems start. So listening to understand, listening to recover meaning. What does the person mean? And how do I understand that? How do I get a real sense of what they mean? And what does it mean to them? Because that's really deep. And I do a little exercise in workshops that I run around this, where we just talk about a particular item. It can be anything, but I tend to choose a glass of wine. And people talk about it. And we just go around the room, and it's just incredible. There's many people in the room. There are different things that people place on that. One woman talked about not being able to get into a wedding dress. Another fella, because he was an alcoholic, says, I never did. It's just incredible. And I think words have that effect. They're triggers for all sorts of experiences and ideas and thoughts that people have. And that's where we've really got to get into to really understand what people are thinking about. And that takes time and effort and patience to do that.
And I think that phrase is going to stay with me a long time, of listening to recover meaning. Recover is a very powerful word, isn't it? It's recover to heal, but it's recover to bring it out again. Yeah. And, patience and so forth. And you've talked about courage as well, Dave. Tell me about courage, and because I know you have a real framing around courage and what that takes of us in conversation. Yeah,
so I think, particularly with some of the stuff that I'm dealing with on a daily basis, I often feel quite frightened, Julian, in the conversations that I'm having, because my objective is to make the situation better. And I think a phrase you've coined for this is risky listening. I think it's something that you've used. But I often feel that you have to be brave. And I talk to my clients around this, that you have to be brave in many different ways to have a real conversation with somebody, particularly if it's a conversation that is challenging or you're struggling with the relationship. And I think the first type of courage I would describe is to show up, to actually be there to have that conversation, and to be there in a way that you're ready to have the conversation. So showing up is really, really important. The next type of courage that I talk about is to speak about, I mean, really speak about what is bothering you, and being open about what is bothering you. And Patrick Lencioni talks about in his dysfunctions in the team, you know, fear of conflict. This is why teams get stuck, because that fear of conflict, that being open, you know, vulnerability, trust with your colleagues. So, and that's really difficult, you know, if you're being open about how you feel, you're making yourself really vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's really challenging. So I think that takes a lot of courage. The next type of courage that I feel is really, really critical is the courage to listen to how the person responds. Because often in a conversation, any conversation, I think, you know, even if the conversation is going well, often our sense of self can be challenged, who we are can be challenged. And, you know, if we feel threatened, and, you know, I quite often feel threatened in conversations, and it's quite hard to switch that side of you off and to really, really listen to what the person is saying. You feel like you have to come back with something, or defend, or justify, or I really like the concept of the monkey coming out of the cage in the book, The Chimp Paradox, where if your chimp is activated, and the types of things that activate it, if you feel you have to justify yourself, if you feel you have to defend yourself, that means your chimp is awakening, and you have to be careful. So I think that that courage to actually listen is really, really important. So you've kind of got to a stage then where you've shown up, you've said something, you've listened, and then you've got the next bit of courage, which is to actually take on board what's being said. And maybe, you know, in my experience, a relationship is about two people or three people. You all have a role, you all have a part, you all have accountability, you all have responsibility in that. And it's never one-sided. So taking on board your role in that and how you've contributed to the dynamics feels really, really critical. And then the final piece of courage is to commit to that relationship in a way that you can support any changes that you feel you need to make. And I think often people will say they'll pay lip service to a change of behavior, but actually making a full commitment takes courage, I think. So they're kind of my thoughts about courage in conversation.
Well, it's. I mean, listening to you, and I'm sure those listening to you, in terms of the recording, I mean, my reaction to that is, you know, it feels quite visceral. I mean, it is challenging, isn't it? And the notion of bothering comes through, doesn't it? To bother to show up and bother, to speak and really speak about what's bothering you, to really listen to how someone responds. This notion of risky listening, which above all for me is getting over oneself and one's to take things on board and how we contribute, and then to commit as a consequence.
Yeah, and I think
very rich panoply of things. Thank you. Yeah, sorry.
No. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut. I wasn't listening there. There's another concept that I want to talk about in a moment, which is really important, which is turn taking. And I didn't let you take your turn, Julian. I'm very sorry about that. So I think people have preferences around those courages. So some people find it easier to listen than maybe they do to take things on board. Other people find it easier to speak up. Do you know what I mean? So I think there are particular.
I find it easier to listen than to speak, for instance.
Yeah. So I think it's understanding where your strengths are within that and how you can start to work with that. But also, how can you manage the other bits where you might need to spend more time working on what you need to do to develop your capability, really. I mean, I'm constantly developing my capability around these issues. I'm doing a piece of work at the moment, which is all about listening. And it's really, really about speaking very little, because what we're doing in the piece of work is allowing people to process very difficult experiences. So yeah, and I'm quite more into speaking, you know, and conveying information than I might be about listening, actually. So yeah, interesting stuff, I think. So I don't know.
Come to turn taking. Come to whatever you'd like to really emphasize for us as well. You know, on the back of pressure, relationship, listening to recover meaning, the importance of words, these 5 elements of courage, turn taking. Perhaps would you like to talk about turn taking or whatever?
Oh yeah, I would. Yeah, I'd love to talk about turn taking. And so there's a really interesting piece of work by Professor Elizabeth Stoker, and she's an amazing woman. I mean, if you just go on YouTube, you'll see her speaking about linguistic structure. So what I find fascinating about this is it's a relatively new area for me to get my head around, but it's been, I think it's been transformational actually, in terms of my ability to relate to people personally, and just the importance of structure and processes in our everyday language. And a lot of these kind of processes and structures are outside of awareness, they're completely subconscious. We have no idea that they're in play. And how she's kind of come up with these insights is literally analyzing thousands and thousands of recordings and just listening to, you know, what actually makes a difference in those conversations. And that's right across a spectrum, from, you know, analyzing police officers that talk to suicide victims and, you know, that kind of thing, people who are threatening suicide, you know, what would stop someone jumping off or not, in terms of what you say and what you don't say, that kind of thing. And there's just some beautiful things to learn from that. I mean, it's just incredible. But the real simple one that really stands out for me is this principle of turn taking in conversations. That when a conversation is going well and people are respecting each other, listening to each other, valuing each other, they allow each person to take their turn fully. And it's really interesting watching this yesterday. I was in a meeting yesterday which was full of energy because there was a problem that was trying to be solved. A huge amount of not negative energy, but just energy. And there was no turn taking at all. People were just talking over each other. And there was one person in that conversation who was getting really, really upset. And because of the energy and the focus on, I need to take my turn, that's the kind of unconscious dialogue. They got really upset. So taking turns is a really simple way to really value others.
Because it's about respect, isn't it? Apart from anything.
But it can be really challenging, particularly if you've got a lot to say or you've got something important to say. That waiting to take your turn is really hard.
No, Dave. I and others listening to this would like this to go on for a long time, because I'm learning so much from just listening to all you think and do and practice. And as we, you know, reflect on what you've been saying about the context, pressure, difference, leadership, importance of relationship, connection, listening, your menu of things on courage and turn taking, what would you leave us with in terms of perhaps a challenge on practice? You know, here we are all trying to thrive in these very complex times. Conversation, we spend so much time in conversation. What would you challenge us with?
Right. So this is something I do with if I'm coaching or working with people, is just to say, let's take a 2-week challenge for the next 2 weeks. Yeah.
Okay.
Practice just listening. And your objective is to say as little as possible to the other person that you're with. And just observe, just sit back and see how that changes the dynamic. And I think it's just being willing to go with that and to try that out. And this first happened to me. This is not my own idea to do this. This is what I learned when I did my mediation training many years ago. We were given that challenge just to practice the listening skills, and it was transformational. And just being quiet with people and allowing people to talk is just really amazing. What people tell you is incredible. It's game changing, I think. So that would be my first one. My second challenge would be to try out the turn taking, no matter how difficult it is and how much you want to take your turn first, or try to go second and try to wait till the person is finished. And that might be challenging if you know someone who doesn't stop talking. But I think it's worth a try. And then the final one, which we haven't talked about yet, but I think it's important. No matter how great we are in a conversation and how skilled we are, conversations go wrong. So it's what do we do when the conversation is not going well? And what people do, in my experience, is they try to carry on. And there's just a little technique that I've learned called STOP, which is an acronym. It's a double P at the end, not one P. And it's just think to yourself, stop if the conversation's not going well. And step back, take a breath, observe, get a bit of perspective, and practice some patience. So they're my 3 things for people to try out.
Brilliant, Dave. So 3 things in a 2-week challenge to us trying to be wise in conversation: to listen, to really step back and observe, to take our turn, however impatient we might feel because we are cross about things or whatever it might be. And when things are taking a bad turn, as they often do in conversations, particularly in challenging circumstances, to stop. Yeah.
That's the most simple, straightforward thing you can do, is just stop.
Yeah. And another P for me there is to pause. And we're going to pause now, Dave, after what has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank
pause
you.
until the next one. Thank you so much. It's been delightful.
Thank you, Julian.
And I hope those who are listening think we've had a wise conversation about wise conversation.
Brilliant.
I've really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you for allowing me to speak, allowing me to take my turn.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.